Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you a return guest today, and are honored to be joined again by Ben Zimmer, the Chief Executive Officer of Priovant Therapeutics. They are a clinical stage biotech company. They're focused on delivering novel therapies for really severe autoimmune diseases, the ones that are associated with the greatest morbidity and mortality out there. And their oral drug, Brepocitinib, is a first-in-class dual inhibitor of TYK2 and JAK1. They're developing it across multiple severe autoimmune indications and ultimately unlocking new treatment options for patients that are, let's just say, extremely underserved by the existing therapies that are out there. Prior to this role, Ben joined Priovant from Roivant, where he was a member of their founding team and held multiple leadership roles across that organization, including as president of Roivant Health, chief operating officer, and head of public affairs. And there he led and oversaw the development of various parts of that company, including the Chinese biopharma subsidiaries, various health tech companies that were spun out, and the drug discovery, the computational drug discovery arm. And then earlier in his career, Ben was a consultant at McKinsey and co-founded and led a really interesting public policy nonprofit. Did his undergraduate from Harvard, went on to get a law degree from Yale, and honored to have him back. A lot to get into today. Very interested in seeing where everything is going. But Ben Zimmer, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here again.
Yeah, it's great having you. I really enjoyed the first episode we recorded, and we'll, of course, be referring to that in the show notes. But, I'd love to jump right back in and sort of reintroduce some of the topics we touched on last time. Obviously, the company, its core statement is about developing targeted therapies for these severe autoimmune disorders. And while many in the audience, no doubt, are familiar with the rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis and lupus and things like that, much less so dermatomyositis and uveitis and cutaneous sarcoidosis and everything. There's a very long list out there of stuff that is just unmet, yet these diseases are very substantial as a group. They cause many morbidities, large cost, and what the existing system has brought them is, why they're classified as unmet, because there's just a lot of therapies out there, and that delays diagnosis when we don't really understand them as well. Take us into the domain, if you would, and reintroduce this world of severe autoimmune diseases that most people don't hear of on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I mean, you put it pretty well. There's really kind of a set of maybe 5 to 8 autoimmune diseases that have been the focus of a lot of pharmaceutical drug development and therapeutic innovation, including the ones you referred to: RA, psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, increasingly IBD, like Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. Obviously, these are terrible conditions too, and it's great that patients have access to an increasing number of therapies. But there's really been an underserved set of diseases that are much rarer, but not ultra rare. We're not talking about these kind of ultra rare genetic conditions that affect hundreds or single digit thousands of people in the world. These are conditions that in the US alone generally affect mid to high tens of thousands of adults, sometimes affect children as well, and tend to be characterized by particularly severe inflammation, particularly involvement of multiple different inflammatory pathways, And as a result of that, often, such as in the case of dermatomyositis or sarcoidosis, which you referred to, affect multiple different organ systems. And so, really very debilitating for patients, and there's very little available for patients. And you've had this intersection of these are very hard to treat because there's so much inflammation going on, because they affect multiple organ systems. They tend to be very difficult to treat, very difficult to find drugs that work. And then, they don't affect quite as many people. So the intersection of those two things together has really led them to be, in my opinion, underserved by pharmaceutical innovation. And we're certainly not the only company focused in this space, but I think one of a relatively small number that are kind of at the vanguard of really tackling these particular types of diseases.
And something you said there very important. And when we get to sort of the why you're developing as again this dual TYK2 JAK1 inhibitor, the fact that so many different types of inflammatory responses and cytokines and all that stuff come into play with some of these diseases, fits perfectly into sort of your pharmacologic strategy there. But before we get to that, let's just again review for the audience, because again we're talking about highly morbid, sometimes fatal, very costly to treat currently. And dermatomyositis, as you mentioned, is sort of one of the ones at the top of that pile. Here you have a systemic autoimmune disease, affects skeletal muscle, can affect the skin, and again, a wide range of organs ultimately that it could trickle down to, including the heart. Walk us through and take a little time with reintroducing the audience to dermatomyositis, if you would.
Yeah, so dermatomyositis is a really highly debilitating disease. As you mentioned, it's a systemic inflammatory condition, primarily seen in the skin and muscles. It actually pathobiologically starts with inflammation of the vasculature, so that's how it can impact multiple organ systems the way it does. But then you generally also have immune cell infiltration directly into the skin and muscle tissues as well, causing damage to those organs. So yeah, very severe, debilitating disease. The skin and muscle disease, each individually is very burdensome. With the muscle disease, if not properly treated, this can lead patients to end up in wheelchairs, end up being hospitalized. Large numbers of patients report being unable to do basic daily living activities like walk up a flight of stairs, carry groceries. The skin disease also very debilitating. We're not talking about mild rashes here. DM, the abbreviation sometimes used, DM skin disease, is really quite debilitating. If DM was only a skin condition, it would be one of the worst autoimmune skin diseases. It affects large body surface area, characterized by rashes that are extremely painful and itchy, can often be disfiguring and lead to permanent skin damage. Again, if not properly treated, often lead to hair loss, sometimes calcinosis. So again, really, really bad disease with the skin and muscles. And then it can impact other organs as well, particularly lung disease. Interstitial lung disease is a common comorbidity of DM. I would also note that because the disease is so bad and because there's no modern therapies approved, patients are generally treated primarily with high dose oral corticosteroids. So, we see over half of patients treated with prednisone or prednisone equivalent of 10 milligrams per day or more chronically. And so this is this is necessary because if it wasn't for that, they would not be able to do basic functioning. But
Right.
taking that level of steroids chronically carries its own severe adverse health effects, including as relates to cardiometabolic disease in particular, but also general comorbidities, arthritis, bone strength, again, hair loss. So, you kind of have this double whammy, as it were, of the disease itself, and then the impacts of the steroids on that. So these patients are are really suffering. And although the steroids certainly help and add value, it's not like they're completely treating the disease. So you have a lot of patients out there who, the steroids help somewhat, but they continue to suffer a lot. Plus, they then have the side effects of the steroids. So really a significant need for new modern therapies.
Mhm. And I think that fits so nicely into why Brepocitinib is an awesome candidate in the sense. Okay, on one hand, over here we have the glucocorticoid, steroids, which shut everything down, plus impact all those bad steroid sensitive genes. We don't like that. On the other hand, sort of the highly targeted biologics that hit maybe one cytokine or so. The combination of developing something that hit both TYK2 and JAK1, and just looking at some of the cytokine sort of storm that they interfere with. So TYK2, we're talking about interleukin 12, 23, alpha and beta interferons, JAK1, IL-2, 4, 6, 10, 13, some of the interferons as well. Again, a very broad anti-inflammatory response potential. And then, with the goal of ultimately helping to keep away all that steroid bad stuff we don't want. Talk a little bit about sort of, the intricacies of developing something that has a multiple mechanism like this, because we know it's something that maybe in the past was shied away from. Say, oh, this is dirty, but no, there's a reason and rationale here pharmacologically why you're doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so JAK1 and TYK2 are two isoforms of the JAK enzyme. So there's four JAK enzymes: JAK1, JAK2, JAK3, and then the oddly named TYK2, which is, I think, an accident of scientific discovery that it has a different name, but could be called JAK4. And what these enzymes are involved in, as you were alluding to, is cytokine signaling pathways. So generally, when the way cytokines actually stimulate immune cells to do certain things is through this what's called the signal transduction process, where they bind to a receptor on the membrane of the cell, and then there's a series of biochemical reactions that communicate to the nucleus, which expresses new genes to lead the cell to do something. And the JAK enzymes are a key part of that signal transduction process. And so it's a very biologically elegant tool whereby inhibiting the JAK enzyme, you're actually able to inhibit the signaling of multiple different cytokines versus a biologic that would be targeted only at a single cytokine. So that's kind of the JAK inhibitors overall. But then within the JAK inhibitors, there's kind of even a sort of sub-level of precision where it's okay, which of the different isoforms do you target? Because different pairwise combinations of JAK enzymes are involved in the signaling of different cytokines. So for instance, type 1 interferon, which is one of the most important cytokines in dermatomyositis, the signal transduction of that is mediated through both JAK1 and TYK2. So to be able to be a dual JAK1 TYK2 inhibitor is particularly relevant for that. There's also other cytokines involved in dermatomyositis biology that are mediated by only JAK1 or TYK2. So for instance, type 2 interferon is mediated by JAK1, interleukin 12 and 23 by TYK2. And so, while there are other JAK inhibitors approved and TYK2 inhibitors approved, there's no approved drug that is a dual inhibitor of both JAK1 and TYK2. And so this drug really has novel first-in-class pharmacology where we're able to get both that, kind of ideally suited suppression of type 1 interferon, but also inhibit more generally a set of cytokines that no other JAK inhibitor could inhibit and that no biologic target could, no single sign targeted biologic could address. And to kind of come back to where we started, and you alluded to this point, this really kind of ties into the category of diseases we're looking at as well, because these are severe, highly inflammatory conditions. There's actually a lot of biologics that have been evaluated in trials for dermatomyositis and have failed. And Brepocitinib, it really provides that right balance of being a modern targeted therapy um, that really targets the underlying disease pathology of dermatomyositis in a very targeted and focused way. But also because that disease pathology is kind of broad and multidimensional, you need a drug that can actually hit multiple of the different inflammatory axes and pathways, and that that's what our drug appears to do, and we're excited about that.
Yeah, I'm very excited, and again, just summing up for the audience, we got a small molecule. It's orally given, multiple pathways inhibited. You have broad efficacy, the safety looking a lot better than sort of the earlier JAK inhibitors in terms of immunosuppression and lipid issues. And the last time you were here, I think it was sort of the very beginning of the Valor study. I know it had been designed. I don't know if it was kicked off at that point because of a 52-week study. But again, I'll just throw out these. So a couple hundred patients, 2 doses, 52-week double blind. The primary endpoint was sort of this total improvement score, and then you're also looking at things like the skin disease, the muscle strength, steroid sparing effects, and all that. Another very important topic. Take a little time to it's been about a year, but walk us through what's happened since the Valor started, because got some exciting results.
Yeah, so we set out, one of the challenges of developing drugs for these conditions is, I think there's really two. One is the biologic challenges of finding a drug that can actually address the underlying disease biology. That's what we've been discussing. I think there's a second challenge, which is if you think about a clinical trial in a sort of ideal theoretical sense, what you want is you want to have one investigational variable, which is whether the patients are on drug or on placebo, and you
Yeah.
want every other control variable to be identical. That's kind of like in a theoretical science experiment, how you would design it. That obviously does not align with the real world of clinical medicine, where every patient is different. But particularly for a disease where there's no drug approved, patients are really, every doctor kind of has their own view of how to manage these patients. Again, steroids are the staple for everyone, but there's all sorts of, other different drugs that are tried out and evaluated because the doctors are working to try to make the patient better. And so you
Mm-hmm.
end up with, patients on kind of very heterogeneous background medications. And so you have to, be really thoughtful about designing the trial. And we really wanted to design it in a way that enrolled a real world population of dermatomyositis patients. So not be overly restrictive. So we allowed all sorts of various different combinations of background medication. We allowed patients from very mild skin and muscle disease to quite severe skin and muscle disease. We allowed patients with cardiovascular risk factors into the trial. We allowed patients who had prior history of benign or malignant neoplasm into the trial. Obviously, there were some exclusion criteria to ensure patient safety, but we really tried to be as broad as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, the broader you are with the exclusion criteria from a kind of like, experiment, that's like the right thing to do from a clinical medicine perspective and from making your results as meaningful as possible. But it also, from a kind of trial design statistical perspective, it introduces a risk of noise because you have, every subject in the trial is not the same. And so that can introduce variability. So as a result of this, we set out to so what is the solution to that? It's enroll a really big trial, and so that's what we did. We enrolled a 241 patient trial. Importantly, all dermatomyositis patients. There's other categories of diseases called inflammatory myopathies, which are just
Mm-hmm.
categories of muscle inflammation.
Right.
Um, And in our view, the biology of these diseases is pretty different, and they should be thought of separately and distinctively. But there
Sure.
are some other companies who have run trials that are kind of pooled trials across multiple different inflammatory myopathies. So notably, this was 241 patients, all with dermatomyositis, which is the largest interventional trial conducted. Obviously, if you're thinking about obesity trials or something that are enrolling
Right.
tens of thousands of people, this is tiny, but for a rare disease, it's a very large trial. Over 90 sites, 4 continents, 20 countries, so really large global trial.
Yep.
As you noted, we evaluated 2 doses, so Brepocitinib once daily 30 milligrams, once daily at 15 milligrams, and placebo. And we did a 1 year of placebo-controlled evaluation, which again was a very aggressive move because, as you can imagine, these patients are very sick. One of the reasons they want to join the trial is to, potentially be on a medication that might help them. And so, when, in general, patients are hoping that they're not on placebo, and so to be on placebo for a year to get patients to agree to that, I would say, I really appreciate all the patients who volunteered their time to participate in a 1 year placebo-controlled trial. And while it was certainly a lot of extra effort, I think on the back end, we now have data that's much more meaningful and robust because we can actually assess the benefit and safety profile of the drug in a placebo-controlled setting out to 1 year, which I think is, very important, both for the FDA submission and regulatory submissions in other countries, as well as ultimately for how the information that doctors and patients have when deciding whether to use this in the real world. So that
Right.
was the background and design. The exciting news, and I think one of the catalysts for me being invited back on, which I really appreciate, is that in September, we found out the news that the study was positive, and so that was very very exciting. Obviously, um, needless to say, this was the first ever positive 52-week placebo-controlled trial conducted of any therapy in dermatomyositis, and the first ever positive registration supporting trial for a novel targeted therapy for a new molecular entity. Um,
Mhm.
so very excited about that. Happy to go into more details on the data and the endpoints and what we saw, but a very exciting result, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, if you can continue down those lines, especially just because I a couple careers ago had some involvement there as well, not just sort of the exciting sort of the clinical results, but the whole steroid sparing thing is kind of interesting as well because that's sort of one of the holy grailish things. If we can get patients ultimately away from the corticosteroids, as good as they are doing X, obviously a lot of problems. Can you also say what you saw there? Because I think
Yeah,
that's
absolutely,
sort of a double
absolutely,
whammy.
absolutely. So the study, the data was really quite compelling. So the first thing I would say is, we looked at, in terms of what was actually measured in the study, a very large number of endpoints. But then, in your statistical analysis plan to have maximum statistical rigor, you pre-specify both the primary endpoint, but then also a number of what are called key secondary endpoints. Which it's much more, a result is much more meaningful if you pre-specify it than if you kind of after the fact go find where you can get a p-value. So we pre-specified 10 endpoints, including the primary, and all 10 of them hit statistical significance with clinically meaningful result. And notably, on all of them, we also saw a dose response between the 30 milligram dose and the 15 milligram dose, which really further buttresses the meaningfulness of the result. And these included measurements, again, in one of the reasons we ranked so many endpoints is in a disease like dermatomyositis that affects a lot of different organ systems and has the steroid burden. There's a lot of different things you want to measure to assess the benefit for patients. So these included Global endpoints. The primary endpoint is a measurement called the total improvement score, which is a
Yeah.
combination of some different measurements. But it also included a number of skin-specific measurements. It included a a sort of functional patient questionnaire. It's called the Health Assessment Questionnaire Disability Index. It's actually used in multiple rheumatic conditions, but measures very fundamental things to patients living in terms of muscle disease, like, how easily you can get in and out of a car, how easily you can get dressed, how easily you can walk up 5 steps. And we saw clinically meaningful, statistically significant improvement there relative to placebo. And then in terms of steroid sparing, I would note that, and this was quite notable, that so we did in the study protocol have a steroid sparing requirement where all
Right.
patients were required to taper down to 5 milligrams per day, and then it was encouraged at physician discretion to go lower than that. So at the baseline of the trial, around 75% of patients were on background steroids with a mean dose of around 11 to 12 milligrams per day. So that gives you a sense, again, that was not a requirement to enroll in the trial. Like patients did not
Okay.
need to be on background steroids. So it kind of comes to my point that we had very broad inclusion criteria and then wanted to meet the real world population where it is. But the reality of the real world population is they're mostly on very high dose steroids.
Right.
So, within the of the patients on background steroids at the start of the trial, over 60% in the Brepocitinib 30 milligram arm were able to get down to a minimal dose of 2.5 milligrams per day, and about a third were able to come off steroids altogether. And that was about twice the reduction numbers that we saw in the placebo arm. And all of this was occurring against the backdrop of clinical improvement as well.
Hmm.
So very exciting in that you see both clinical improvement relative to placebo and patients coming off steroids, either coming down on steroids to a minimal dose or coming off steroids altogether at a much higher rate in the Brepocitinib 30 milligrams arm compared to placebo. So I think,
Hmm.
those two things together and the combination of them, we think, is really an exciting result that hopefully will have a lot of meaningfulness to patients.
Hmm. No doubt. No doubt. But what could you take us, a little bit into what happens next? Because I know the company, talks about a first half of 2026 NDA filing, which coming up coming up pretty soon. And just again, because we on the last show, we talked a little bit about the Vant model, about you guys find these underappreciated assets, you find the unmet medical needs, put them together, and you do this amazing clinical work. But now, on the forefront of having a registered product for something like this, and I took a little look at sort of, okay, there's in the world of rheumatology, there's a group of thought leaders that specializes in these myositis and so forth, and there's certain centers of excellence. I mean, and again, if we're touching on anything confidential here, don't go down it. But like, what is the plan here ultimately when something like this? Because clearly it's a very targeted thing, but this drug is going to impact many autoimmune diseases ultimately. What's a little bit of what's going to be what should be happening in the coming year?
Yeah, so I think, really, I would say three focuses at Priovant right now. So the first and most important is the regulatory submission, starting with the NDA submission in the United States.
Right.
So as you note, we're planning to submit the filing in the first half of next year. We are working very hard. Obviously, first half is a wide range, and we're working very hard to have that as soon as possible. We sort of give a wide range of estimate because these are incredibly, complicated filings. There's been
Sure.
if you include not just the clinical trials, but the non-clinical trials of Brepocitinib, there's been over 100 trials of the drug. There's all of the manufacturing
Yep.
information, all of the, pharmacologic information, all of the quality controls that have been put in place around the development of the drug. So these
Yep.
NDAs, they're hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million pages of somewhat technical, or not somewhat, extremely technical documents.
Right.
And so we've obviously been working on this for a while, but really getting all of that together and submitted is a major undertaking. But we're working to get that done as quickly as possible. I think then once it gets in, it's generally it can vary, but generally a 8 to 12 month process in terms of the drug being approved if all goes well. Obviously, things can can delay that and things can accelerate you towards the front of that end. And there's of course a lot of different back and forth with FDA over the course of that. It's not like you just sort of hand it in and sit there
Right.
for
Right.
8 months and then get an answer. There's quite a bit of dialogue, and they'll ask for follow-up information. They'll give you a sense of how they're thinking about certain things. So that's a kind of very interactive process. And then if that's successful, the drug will be approved in the United States. And in parallel to doing that NDA submission process, we're working now on really building up the operations and infrastructure to be able to launch and commercialize the drug ourselves. So that's really the second big priority at the company. Obviously in business, everything is for sale for the right price,
Right.
and any CEO of a company that tells you otherwise is, probably not being fully forthcoming. But it is not, sometimes biotech companies will like get a phase 3 data or get a phase 2 data even, and the next thing they do is hire an investment bank to run an auction to try to sell the company. And
Right.
that's the opposite of what we're doing. We're hiring a bunch of people to get ready to launch the drug. And so that's very exciting. Something I'm very passionate personally about. We've been working in this space with these physicians and patients for years, and I kind of want to finish the job. And to me, finishing the job
Sure.
means patients in the real world who can benefit from this medicine are able to do that, not just generating data that's kind of, exciting in a press release or a medical publication. Um, and then the sort of third prong of things we're working on is additional diseases, additional
Right.
indications. So, you mentioned non-infectious uveitis. I think we talked a bunch about that on our last show since we'd
Yep.
recently had some promising phase 2 data there. That phase 3 trial is going very well, and we'll be reading out in the not distant future. We have this phase 2 trial in cutaneous sarcoidosis. So, we mentioned before, sarcoidosis is another example of one of these rare, highly morbid autoimmune diseases that can affect a lot of different organs. This phase 2 trial, for simplicity, we're focused just on looking at skin disease. But if that reads out positively, which will be next year, we'll be looking to a phase 3 program there. And then we're also thinking about some other ideas to initiate trials as well that again kind of fit the same phenotype of these rare but not ultra rare autoimmune diseases with very little to nothing available for patients today in terms of approved modern therapies and a very high disease burden. So
Mhm.
really advancing all three of those prongs at once, the regulatory submission, the commercial and launch preparation work, and then the kind of ongoing R&D into
Right.
additional diseases.
And just again for the audience, I think we last time we talked about uveitis, we talked about the Neptune study, and now there's something known as the Clarity study, which I think is the phase 3. And there's we'll put a link to that as well, so people can learn about that because I think that's still enrolling, if I'm I'm not mistaken. But yeah, again, I'm excited for you. And it was exciting last time, but I love seeing not just successful things like this come to fruition through phase 3, but also the dreams of the so-called FIPCO, right, the fully integrated pharmaceutical company happening outside of big pharma is exciting. So
No,
I'm rooting you on.
yeah,
I'm
no,
rooting you
I
on.
appreciate it. And look, I think, I think a company like ours is kind of the one to make that transition from development
Yeah,
to commercialization effectively. And where you've seen biotech companies do that effectively, I do think it's working rarer, in these rarer diseases where we've been working with the physicians and patients and patient groups in this space for many years and have that foundational relationships and collaboration in place. And I think that's helpful as you make that transition. Um, obviously there's, many more physicians in the real world who treat dermatomyositis than just the ones who participate in clinical trials or, attending medical conferences and things like that. So we'll certainly, you know, make an effort to get to know and do scientific engagement and education with those physicians, as well. But I do think it's a much more manageable thing than if you had if we had developed a new atopic dermatitis therapy or something
right.
like that. And, there it's like, okay, a big pharma company that's been commercializing drugs in atopic dermatitis for 20 years is
Yeah.
probably gonna be better suited to that if we're being realistic. But, something like dermatomyositis or the other spaces we're in, they're smaller spaces, more niche, smaller numbers of people. I think they really value the fact that we have been a research company in that space, doing work. And, the reality is no one has actually, you know, launched a successful dermatomyositis product. So a big pharma company in some ways would be figuring it out for the first time in the same way that we are. So, I don't mean to minimize
Yeah.
the level of challenges involved, even just operationally being able to make that quick transition. There's just so much, even from an infrastructure perspective, you need to have to launch a
Sure.
product that you don't need to have to do R&D. And so, building all of that up as quickly as possible is a major focus of ours. So certainly a lot of work, but yeah, I'm excited for it, and I think I can speak on behalf of our whole company. We have a lot of passion for the work and the patients in the space. I think we like working with the researchers in the space, and like I said, we kind of wanna finish the job.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. And I'm sure this is confidential, but I'll just ask anyway. Have you guys have a brand name yet? Planned out?
We don't know.
Yeah.
So, but that
Yeah.
will in due time. It's a good question.
Follow up next year.
In due time. So,
I'm sure it'll be cool.
yeah, I mean, pharmaceutical names.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
funny
Still,
that's a funny niche of the
few of us
world.
get to
Is the
do it,
farm?
so I was just
Yeah.
wondering. As
No,
yeah.
totally.
Um, Ben, anything else while we have you today that we should know about as we get into 2026? Not that you don't have a lot on your plate, but if there's anything I missed, and then I got any other public-facing stuff for the company, whether it's investor conferences or scientific conferences or stuff coming up in the first couple of months of the year, please.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we have a, pretty significant presence at certainly all of the dermatomyositis and uveitis
Hmm.
specific conferences, but also just more generally rheumatology meetings and inflammatory derm meetings. We just recently had the ACR rheumatology meeting in Chicago where we had a large presence. Coming up in the spring, there's the American Academy of Dermatology meeting, which we'll be at, as well as the Global Conference on Myositis, which is a great meeting. That one's actually in Portugal. But if anyone either is in Europe or wants to go to Portugal, that's a great meeting. Um, and a number of others from there. A lot of smaller regional rheumatology and inflammatory derm meetings we're at as well. So a lot of conferences like that we'll be at. And then from an investor perspective, as Priovant's a private
Sure.
company. The majority owner of Priovant is Roivant, and then Pfizer is a minority owner. So, Roivant is at a number of investor conferences, always,
Right.
discussing their business as a whole, which certainly includes Priovant as an important part of
Right.
it, but is not limited uh, to Priovant. Roivant's actually having an investor day, I think in early December. So I think a lot of opportunities through them from that angle. Our focus is primarily on the the more medical
Sure.
conferences, as well as like patient advocacy conferences and things like that.
Right. Right. Well, it's going to be an exciting 2026, no doubt, and I look forward to doing episode 3
Yeah,
next
no, I
year.
hope so. Hopefully, knock on wood, we'll continue
Yeah,
to progress well and have a lot more exciting developments to share in another year.
excellent, excellent. Again, for everybody out there that is going to be listening to this episode across the podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been spending time with Ben Zimmer, Chief Executive Officer, Priovant Therapeutics, doing really amazing things to develop therapies for these novel, severe autoimmune disorders. The name of the drug is Brepocitinib. Be on the lookout for what it's called in the market. But Ben, again, was thank you taking the time out to update us on everything you have going on there. Thank you for what you do for patients. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for everybody. Really a great story.
Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.